As it is every year, October is the time to get things a little spooky. Look at YouTube, there are a lot of YouTubers who do some sort of Halloween thing throughout October because doing things only on the 31st is just not enough. And I am also doing that because I want to conform to trends. And since I actually kind of planned something out for once in my life, there will be a video today and another video that'll come out on Halloween. So if you enjoy this video, be sure to subscribe to see what that video is all about. It means a lot, helps me make more videos and yada yada. You're not here for that. You're here for spooky stories to read during a spooky time, so let's get into it. There are a lot of ways to describe Junji Ito. By the way, this is a video about Junji Ito. But anyway, I like to call him the king of horror manga. His art style is incredibly distinct and lends itself well to horror, especially if you look at his extremely emotive characters all the way to his downright unnerving creature designs. Ito is really good at creating extremely interesting situations that are not really seen in other stories. He also doesn't typically fall into the usual J-horror trappings that revolve around Japanese folklore because that's so been there, done that. I also believe he's one of the best at getting the closest you can get to having a jump scare in manga form. He sets it up so incredibly well and his designs make the horror pay off in a satisfying way. Combine these things and it's easy to see why he's so memorable. I could probably go way more in depth about why Ito is so great, but that's a different video. See, he has a lot of stories that he's written over the years, but the majority of people are only familiar with the more popular works. Whether it be from the anime that aired last year, occasional Reddit post about one of his well-known works, usually Glycerin or Enigma of Amigara Faults, 4chan story threads, which is where I got most acquainted with Ito way back when, or what have you, but there's still a large amount of stories that aren't as talked about. And with the Uzumaki anime happening, I took it upon myself to reread almost all of Junji Ito's works and pick out some of my favorite lesser known stories for you all to read on Halloween. Also, stick around to the end and I'll give some other horror manga recs that aren't Ito. Real quick, before I go into what my favorite lesser known works are, it would make sense to briefly explain what I feel constitutes his more recognized works. Because he has so many stories, I feel okay about limiting what I could pick. First and foremost, I'm not picking anything that was in the Junji Ito collection. Even if it wasn't good, people watched it, and you should have already read the stories from that show to see what they actually should be like. Side note, the Oshikiri Chronicles is a really fun setup, and if you haven't read it, you should. First recommendation, I guess. Side note, The Bridge is a comedy masterpiece in anime form for all the wrong reasons. You should absolutely watch it with your friends if you can. In addition to that, I'm not picking most of the longer stories because those are the ones that are usually the most popular. So no Tomi, Soichi, Uzumaki, Cat Diary, Hellstar Rumina, or Gyo. Finally, there are a couple of one-offs that I feel are too popular, but instead of saying them all, I'll just put a little graphic up of all the ones I'm not using. If you feel that there's one that should or shouldn't be there, or if one of my picks is actually a more popular one, let me know in the comments. I tried to be as thorough on the ban list as possible, but I very well could have messed up and misjudged the popularity of one of the stories. With that out of the way, in terms of picking my favorites, I split it up into two categories, the scary ones and the ones that have a great plot. The scary category is pretty self-explanatory, but I should note that the ones I picked didn't necessarily scare me. It was more of me going, hey, that's pretty spooky. As for the good plot side, let's face it, Ito's stories aren't always scary. Even if the events depicted are dire, it might not always be scary. To go even further, some of them are just funny, even if it's unintended. For every scary story, I could probably find one that's just as funny. Like, look at this one. This isn't scary, they're just practicing smoke tricks for TikTok. So these ones are the ones that have a strong story even if it isn't the scariest. But let's start with the scary one for obvious reasons. Look out, spooky skeleton! Wait, hold on. I forgot to mention that I'm not going to be spoiling any of the stories because what's the point of recommending them if I spoil the story? So as a consequence, this probably won't be the most visually engaging video. Alright, with that out of the way, let's bring back the skeleton. Yeah. First up, we have the conversation room, which is what happens when you underfund a hospital and let too many people recover from injuries in the same room, because then you have some annoying victim yapping off in your ear 24/7. Oh, and I guess it also only takes one, maybe demon entity thing to ruin the whole hospital. This story is good at creating an air of discomfort right off the bat if you're being attentive. Without spoiling anything, you'll notice that certain characters have no pupils before it's supposed to happen, and those characters don't even speak until a certain point. You know something's off, but it doesn't get confirmed until near the end. Ito distracts from it with some humor and some other light scares that end up setting up the actual horror. One by explaining how people ended up in certain places, and two by creating an air of doubt before it's shattered, leading to a game of cat and mouse that, as is usual in Ito stories, is hopeless. Next up is the long hair in the attic, which is one I feel works even if you just skimmed over it or something. The visuals in this story are terrifying for reasons I can't really describe because it would ruin it. Once a certain point hits, dread sets in like no other, and then that gets replaced with an unsettling feeling which is just as bad. It might just be me, but the way the creature was designed really plays into something primal in me. The longer I would stare at it, the more unsettled I would get, and the ending really lets your imagination go wild in a prime instance of show don't tell. Also, a lot of questions arise while reading the story, and none of them really make you feel any better. Yeah, you should go read it. And for the final story in the scary section, we have A Deserter in the House, which is one where I'm not entirely sure how popular it is. Anyway, this is one where it builds itself up to a twist that is maybe easy to figure out, but is handled extremely well. If Deserter ended 2 pages earlier, this would have been a whatever story, but the longer it lingered, the scarier it got. Once the veil is pulled, the mind kicks into overdrive trying to figure out what the hell is truly going on, making the normalcy of everything up to this point actually scary. And this sense of fear is only compounded by the abrupt ending, which actually works in this context because even though Ito has terror-inducing art, the fear of the unknown lets us conjure up something in our minds far scarier than possibly anything Ito can come up with. And beyond that, you're left forever wondering what's going to happen next. The family is scared, I'm spooked, and it's time to move on. Moving on to the good story side, we start with Heart of a Father, which is, as the story itself says, tragic. It takes the idea of an overbearing father and gives it a Junji Ito spin. This one's really good because once all the cards are on the table, it rewards a second reading where you can actually figure out what happens when and what the motivation is. Also, this one is cool because in the end, each of the characters are sympathetic to some degree. It's interesting how the supernatural aspects of the story feel realistic and what might actually happen if this power existed and these types of people got their hands on it. And best of all, in very un-Ito fashion, this manga actually has a good ending that really hammers home the melancholic feeling that is present throughout the story. But if you do decide to read it, do know that this is probably the least scary manga on this list and is definitely the saddest one in my eyes. Finally, we have Lovesick Dead, which is the one I would recommend if you especially like the longer stories of Junji Ito. It's not as grotesque or as cosmic horror-y as Uzumaki, but I think it touches on that same feeling of doom on a slightly smaller scale that eventually is shown in a horrifying fashion, though it kinda swerves away from it in the end. While each chapter has a different story to touch on how powerful the villain is, it's truly reflected in the MC, who falls further and further into insanity just like the world around him. The story drags you along just so you can see how things are going to turn out. And while the twist was meh and honestly kind of confusing, it didn't really matter because that was such a small part of what is going on. Everyone is in too deep at this point and it's too late to go back. There's not much I can say that could do it justice outside of telling you to read it, but I can say that this page got a good chuckle out of me. Okay, so I only told you about like 5 stories and you could have probably knocked them out in the time it took for me to actually tell you to read it. But don't worry, I picked out some runner-ups if you're still craving more and I'll keep it brief. Layers of Fear has some effective body horror layered with some unsettling imagery as well as a pretty good ending. Black Paradox has a really intriguing mystery that kinda starts to go all over the place in the second half. There are some really good spooks in this one and the last image is pretty cool. Fixed Face might be one of the most uncomfortable Junji Ito reads for me, even more than the main ones I talked about, but it has that patented Junji Ito ending which hurts it. Bully is good because it's very plausible with an ending that's depressing in a real way, though I don't really see it as scary. But let me stop there because I can just keep going on and on. Plus, I would be remiss if I didn't mention some lowlights. Near Miss might be hands down my least favorite Ito story. So little happened that I'm surprised it made it out of his mind. There are 3-page stories that have more going on. Next up, The Will. It isn't necessarily a lowlight, but this might be the only time I've seen a twist turn a horror story into a comedy. I mean, look at that last image. And if you ever wonder what someone meant by a Junji Ito ending, just look at it. You'll understand. Alright, so before I wrap up, like I said earlier, I have some non-Ito works you should check out. First up is Fuon no Tane. Each story is only like 3 pages, so there isn't really much of a plot. It's more like a spooky proof of concept, but if you go in with that mindset, you'll enjoy it a ton. It can get pretty repetitive, but since each story is pretty short, you're bound to find something that gets ya. Actually, Nakayama Masaaki is one of the other best mangakas at creating a jump scare in manga format. I can even say I got legitimately jump scared by one story. I thought it was over and bam! If you're looking for something older, like around Junji Ito's era, God's Left Hand, Devil's Right Hand is definitely what you're looking for. It's a more cohesive story, but it's just as balls to the wall. Personally, I put Umezo close to Ito, but man, that scissor business in the start is the roughest read I've had with any of these horror manga. Next up, I will swear by You Will Hear the Voice of the Dead. I don't think it's really scary, or at least I don't remember being scared, but it is extremely fun. It's like reading a B-movie, but the art is actually really good. The MC is likable, and who knows, it might be scarier for you. Finally, one of my favorite suffering manga masking as a horror comedy, Miruku-chan. This manga has the killer combo of an absolutely terrifying concept, even more terrifying monster design, excellent execution, and an extremely sympathetic main character. Like, I feel really bad for her. And with that, I think I should end the video here. As with a lot of things, horror is extremely subjective. Just because I didn't find something scary doesn't mean that you won't be absolutely terrified. And because of that, I want you guys to let me know your scariest underrated Junji Ito work or your favorite Ito story in general down in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next video about a certain dog and the horrifying world around him. Yeah, and before you go making an Ito ending, have a good